Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, as you know, we are having lecture on public administration. In the last few lectures, we discussed the different aspects, different approaches to study public administration. Today, we are going to discuss one of the very important topic, that is idea of inclusive democracy. Why this topic? You might have heard the term inclusive growth, Manrega, food for security bills. These are the different steps, different programs, initiatives taken by the government to ensure the participation of the public in and for the welfare of the people. But where these things comes from? So the main thing is the idea of inclusive democracy. So we will see the theoretical perspectives. We will see how this could be translated into actions and what are the approaches to study. So for this, we have requested Dr. G.N. Trivedi for the lecture on this very topic. He is a professor in Delhi University, and his area of interest is Indian politics and public administration. So on your behalf, I welcome Dr. Trivedi for EduSet lecture on this very topic. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Amarendra ji. As he said, I am going to talk about inclusive democracy. This is one of the important themes of democracy. Today we are living in a different world, and in this different world, the success of democracy critically depends on people's participation. If people participate, then the benefits of democracy will percolate down, will go down at the level of grassroots. So this is the basic thrust of inclusive democracy. Unless democracy is inclusive, unless it is participatory, there is no use of any development program. What is the use of growth if the share of the people is minimal, if the benefits of growth are appropriated by handful of people? So this creates problems for making democracy a successful venture, a successful system, a successful human endeavor. So that is why I have chosen this topic of inclusive democracy. The meaning of democracy is also not static. It is dynamic. If you see the historical evolution of democracy, then you find that the trajectory of democracy in terms of its meaning, in terms of its nature, in terms of its expansion, has also changed. So what is the contemporary meaning of democracy? How the idea of contemporary democracy accommodates the aspiration of the people? This is the central theme in democracy all around the world. But here I am going to locate the functioning of democracy in the context of India, or if I say so, that in the context of post-colonial society. India represents one of the important countries of post-colonial societies. So the nature, dimensions, the meaning of Indian democracy also coincide the meaning, nature and dimension of democracy in other third world countries. So let me begin that the idea of inclusive democracy in fact is a major challenge to Indian democracy and its development administration. Here it is also important to point out that unlike the West, democracy in post-colonial society largely depends on the role of a state, as it occupies the prominent place in such societies. It is very true that a state has a very important place in post-colonial society. It is no exaggeration to say that in the states society relationship, in the post colonial society, a state enjoys the preponderance. Therefore, the contours of democracy is primarily determined by the state. The nature of democracy is primarily determined by the state. You know, the stability of democracy, the stability of its functioning depends on the nature of a state. How does a state address the issue of democracy? So, India is no exception to this rule. Now, as I said, the political process led by the state thus makes democracy stable or fragile in India and other post colonial societies. In case of India, democratic discourse was dominated by the state. If you see independence, if you see the role of a state after independence, then you can realize that till late 60s, it was the Indian state that was calling the shot. The participation of people was minimal. It was the political elite. They called the shot. They framed the policies. They came up with the idea of trickle down. They came up with the idea of centralized administration. You know, they came up with the idea of planning commission. Plans, they would be conceived, framed by the planning commission, by the central organs. This was the thrust. But since late 60s, situation started changing. There was participation, there was challenge to one party rule, both at the central level and the state level. This is very important. Since fourth general election, situation started changing, and the dominance of one party system. If you read the literature of that time, then you find that there was a crack in the dominance of one party system. Many North Indian states, they were, for the first time, non-Congress governments were formed. So, the political elite, the elite discourse of democracy made a space for people, for local leaders, for state leaders, for some people, those who had direct control with the grassroots politics. So, they made their presence, and that their presence changed, altered the nature of democracy. But this process of altering did not yield significant result. In 1977, for the first time, non-Congress government was made at the national level. Though this non-Congress government, Janata Party experiment, remained short-lived, but it paved the way. It made the possibility of making non-Congress government at the national level possible, and people realized, it was being realized, that the democracy which was hegemonized by one party is no longer sustainable in India. A kind of democratic competition, there was competition in the beginning also, but that competition was one-sided. Democracy was heavily tilted in favor of one political party. That started changing, as I said, since late 60s, and gradually, subsequently, this competition became more rigorous, more visible, more vigorous. So, it provided the space, competition through people who had direct control, who had direct contact with the people, and they shifted the program and policies of the state. They had a different notion of development. They had a different notion of democracy. They came from the people. They did not have elite political background. Many backward caste leaders came up. People from marginalized areas, marginalized social group, they became leader, they became chief minister. So, it was natural that their thrust on politics, on democracy would be quite different from the earlier thrust. So, that started, or that led the process of realizing different goals in a different way, challenging the centralized idea of development. It continued, but they could not sustain it. The political rivalry, the kind of patronage, it is a long story. They could not sustain, they could not ensure political stability, and gradually they came up with the idea of the people, they came up with the idea of addressing the real issues of the people, but their stint in power and their stint in power increased their lust for political power. So, ultimately, despite their good intention, they were incorporated, they became the part of a state discourse. Their discourse no longer remained fundamentally different from the earlier discourse. This is the problem, this is the agony, this is the unfortunate aspect, but their discourse largely remained a state-centric discourse. So, it would not be wrong to say that a state is such an arena that no social groups or no leaders from different social milieu, they succeeded in transcending the boundaries set by the state. So, by and large, it remained the discourse of the state, dominated discourse. Now, it is in this context though it remained a state dominated discourse, but it presented a new context, a new political context, because the number of participants in the political process increased. So, naturally, it is a new setting, it is a new discourse, and not new discourse, but a new political situation. In this new political situation, how to cope up in this new new political situation. To cope up in this new political situation, there was a need of re-articulating democracy, and as a result of this re-articulation, the idea of inclusive democracy emerged. And it is not only that the idea of inclusive democracy emerged only in India. The idea of inclusive democracy also emerged elsewhere where democracy was functioning. Why? Because these developments in late 80s and early 90s coincided with many significant international developments. What are these important, what are these significant international developments? the most significant international development is the demise of Soviet Union, collapse of Soviet Union. And with the collapse, the old rivalry, international rivalry between two superpowers, that also subsided, that also came to an end. And this resulted a process, this resulted the process of globalization. If I say that it set the process of unbridled capitalism with its specific thrust on neoliberal market reforms. There are other developments, other important developments that have to be to be taken into account. The growth of global terrorism, increasing poverty and attempts to mitigate it. One of the most important attempts to mitigate poverty is Millennium Development Goals. This is very important. Millennium Development Goals, it has set the timetable that by 2015, the number of poor in the world would be cut to half. How far it would succeed in achieving this goal, but seeing the trend, one can safely say that this goal, if it is not impossible, then it is difficult to achieve. So, these are the developments, these are the important developments happened in late 80s and early 90s. And these developments changed the world. It also changed the nature of democracy. How this development, how these international developments impacted the political process in India, because we are talking of the idea of inclusive democracy in the context of India. In case of India, India also bid goodbye to its Nehruvian model of development. It also set its foot on neoliberal market reforms, the pursuance of neoliberal economic reforms. But this pursuance of neoliberal economic reforms followed by India did not synchronize well with the politics of with the new identity politics, with new politics of the poor. Many of the marginalized social groups and poor, this is the time the two paradoxical situations evolved in India. On the one hand, India is following neoliberal reforms, economic reforms, going for liberalization, privatization and globalization. On the other hand, we also find aggressive politics of marginalized social groups, backward caste movement, Dalit assertion, then the movement of the poor led by Maoists in different parts of India. So, these two kinds of diametrically opposite politics emerged in India. This is very interesting. The decade of 90s and this decade which we are in, it has a very interesting, very fascinating political history. On the one hand, a state has pursued neoliberal goals doggedly. On the other hand, there is a strong resistance by the society, by the deprived social groups and by the poor So, there are two mutually hostile actors in this whole story of political history of India. I can summarize this in one sentence. I can say that there was contradiction between the politics of economics and the politics of democracy. The politics of economics shows the politics of market, whereas the politics of democracy, it shows the politics of real people. It shows the politics of marginalized social group, the poor, hungry, destitute. Their politics is the politics of democracy. So, the politics of economics or the politics of market and the politics of democracy, they are on hostile course. They are mutually hostile to each other. And in this hostility, how can you think of inclusive growth? How can you think of inclusive democracy? This kind of hostility presents a quite contrary situation. It creates exclusion. In the name of market reforms, a state is creating exclusion, whereas in the name of politics of democracy, people are demanding inclusion. They are demanding that the benefits of growth should accrue to them also, should evenly distributed. So, this is a kind of tug of war between politics of market and politics of democracy. Now, the author of this politics of market or politics of economics was the Congress party. It had its government in 1991 led by Narasimha Rao, and they changed, radically altered the politics in India. It was a neoliberal politics. It was a politics that suited the interest of corporate section of society, but they projected that this is the demand of the hour, and this will benefit the larger mass. But people realized that this is not for them. This is for a tiny section of Indian society. So, Congress lost election in 1996. After Congress, UPA and then finally BJP. BJP also doggedly pursued this neoliberal economic reforms, and they, at the time of election in 2004, they gave the slogan of feel good and India shining. But these slogans did not save them, and they lost election. Congress lost election in 96, BJP lost election in 2004. So, both the political parties, main political parties in India, Congress and BJP, they wanted to implement, they wanted to make a radical economic reforms, market economic reforms, but they could not reap the political benefits of these reforms. So, in 2004, UPA came to power, and UPA acutely realized that the agenda, the neoliberal agenda, cannot be pursued unless this agenda is negotiated with the agenda of the people. So, in this context, the idea of inclusive democracy got a new fillip, got a new incentive And this, under this incentive, we find lot of social policies, social programs by the state to give effect to the idea of inclusive democracy. So, and more specifically from the 11th 5-year plan, you know, the major thrust of 11th 5-year plan was on inclusive democracy, inclusive growth. What does it mean? It means that the benefits of growth should be evenly distributed or should be shared by the overwhelming majority, by each and everybody. They should not be appropriated, they should not be cornered by a particular section of society. This was the idea behind the thrust on inclusive growth that prominently figured in 11th 5-year plan, which started in 2007 and continued till 2012. Now we are going to experience 12th 5-year plan. But let me come to the specific policies of the state to give effect to the idea of inclusive growth and inclusive democracy. So, in 2006, government, the major program, the major policy initiative was the policy initiative of National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, NREGA, and that was initially it was implemented in 200 districts, but subsequently it was implemented in the whole country. The idea was to give secured 100 days employment to each and every youth in rural areas. That was the main thrust. NREGA, it showed some important positive results, no doubt about it, but gradually we have come to know that it has also shown many cracks, lot of corruption. There is a tampering with muster roll. Despite all precautions, there is a tampering. The real beneficiaries are not the real beneficiaries, fake beneficiaries and all. So, the kind of success or the kind of expectations it generated, it has up till now failed to achieve. So, this is the one of the major state initiative or state policy formulation to give effect to the idea of inclusive growth. Now, the other important weapon in the hands of people that was also given shape by the state, that is RTI, right to information. And this right to information, it has really empowered people. You know, after all, growth and democracy, it is for the people. People must know where taxpayer money, where the money state is spending. So, this right to education has it has also relative success. It has unraveled many corruption in all development programs and policies. It has revealed that how governance has not achieved its goal because of rampant corruption, because inbuilt corruption. So, RTI has also it has played important role in ensuring accountability, in demanding accountability from the policy framers, from the functionaries of the state, from the bureaucrats, any functionary, whether small or big, it is mandatory on their part that information sought under RTI must be provided. Though there are some violence has taken place, many RTI activists, they have been killed, but it has ensured, it has given effect to the idea of empowerment, to the idea of equitable, to the idea of inclusive growth and inclusive democracy. The other important, most important, one of the important legislation, right to education till the age of 14, it has become fundamental rights. It has become fundamental right to education, it has become fundamental right, and any child up till age 14 can demand compulsory and free education from the state, and the state is duty bound to provide them education. So, this is also a great achievement, though this demand, how far it will be accomplished, there is a big question mark, because it demands lot of spending on recruitment of teachers, in constructing school buildings. So, there are other aspects also, but at least it has started a process where children up till the age of 14, they can demand, if they are properly mobilized, if social activists, if state functionaries, if they mobilize and they really pay heed to this, it is not difficult to make it truly effective. The other state legislation is, it has not been passed by Parliament, and that is Food Security Bill. This is very important, and this provides the foundation to any democracy. In India, we have right to life. This is one of the fundamental rights of the Indian citizen. But what is the meaning of right to life if there is a starvation death? Then this right to life has no meaning. Unless you provide food security, right to life has no meaning. It becomes ineffective. To make right to life truly fundamental right, you have to ensure food security. In the absence of food security, a right to life has no meaning, though it has not been passed by Parliament. There is a lot of debate, but it has been proposed, and it is very difficult for a state not to pass it. There are other bills also, Forest Act, a right of displaced people, rehabilitation. So, lot of policies and programs initiated, implemented by the state to give effect to the idea of inclusive democracy, to the idea of inclusive growth. Now, I come to the last aspect of this, and what is this last aspect? Now, we have to evaluate how far these legislations, these policies have succeeded in ensuring the benefits of growth, ensuring the benefits of growth to the people. This is very important. Merely making policies not going to help unless there is a governance, unless there is a democratic governance. It is very difficult to achieve the goals intended for the people. So, we find that there is a corruption, there is a lack of democratic governance, there is a siphoning of fund, there is a encroachment upon the rights of vulnerable section of society by the strong. So, in such a situation, there is a total absence of democratic governance. This democratic governance is a lack of democratic governance is one of the major hurdles in the realization of fruits of growth. The second evaluative aspect of these policies are centrally conceived, framed and implemented. It does not ensure the larger participation of the people at the level of conception, at the level of formulation, at the level of implementation. So, by and large, these policies are non-participatory. Any policy, howsoever well intentioned, they cannot yield positive result unless there is a larger participation of the people. In the absence of participation of the people, the success of that policy is not possible. This is very important. This is very important because, after all, you have to ensure benefits to the people, and people are absent in the participation, in the conception of the policies. This has happened. The government of India, it realized that unless there is a grassroots democracy, programs and policies, they cannot succeed. So, there was a 73rd amendment in the constitution, and village panchayat, it was made much more powerful. It is playing its important role. All development program and policies, they are rooted through panchayat. But even then, it has largely failed to ensure people's participation. Panchayat, it has emerged as a power organization at the village level, and once you have anything emerged as power organization, arena of power, then vested interest, there is a lot of scope for vested interest, and vested interest, if there is a nexus, then benefits can be denied to the larger mass of the people. Benefits cannot be ensured to the people. So, non-participatory nature of these policies and programs is also one of the reasons for the failure of these such programs. The third dimension that I would like to mention, that policy and programs, they are not addressing structural questions. These policies and programs are in fact conceived, implemented, brought in the focus for the simple reason of legitimacy. The political regime which uses the state power not for truly empowering the people. If you closely scrutinize, if you closely see the role of the government, role of the political regime, then one can easily discern that these programs and policies are employed to get a kind of legitimacy. Whether people are empowered, whether benefits are accrued to the people, these are not important dimensions for the political regime. The important dimension of the for the political regime is whether their role has been legitimized or not, whether they have scored political points or not. So, in such a situation, a structural question, structural issues have been ignored, and the most important structural issue is the issue of land reforms. land reforms, they are, people are still hungry for land. They do not have their own shelter. Forget about land for cultivation. There are millions of people in India homeless. They are on the streets and roads in major cities of India. They are being displaced. So, there is a demand of land from the poor, but land reforms, the issue of land does not figure in the agenda of the government. Recently, we saw that there was a march of 50,000 people, and they are demanding land reforms. They are demanding land for their sustainability. In rural India, land is one of the critical resources upon which the livelihood of the people critically depends. So, land reform is totally neglected, and this neglect has not only made people angry, is not made people hungry and poor, but it has also given rise to radical politics. The Maoist, after all, what is the demand of the Maoist? The demand of the Maoist is land, land right. Land right is one of the, why they are getting legitimacy, why the poor, they find them as their friend. They find them their friend simply because they are raising their issues. They need, this is their dream, that they must have their own piece of land. And how they can have their own piece of land unless there is focus of the state on land reforms. Now, we have heard that land acquisition bill is coming to the parliament, but there several attempts have been made by state and center. Sometimes the government of India, it says that land figures in the state list, so there is no uniformity. So, on some pretext or other, the issue of land reforms, it has not been given adequate emphasis. The kind of emphasis it should receive has not received so far. Only the states of West Bengal and Kerala, we can say that the land reform measures have been sincerely attempted, sincerely they have been done in these two states, but in all other states we find that the implementation of land reforms has remained lopsided, has remained lackluster. So, the point which I want to mention again and again is that unless structural reforms are, land reform is one of the structural reforms. Now, the credit facility, credit facility is also not very intact. Credit to the poor provided by the bank and provided by public institutions. This is also because in many of the tribal areas, the local private credit, the local Mahajan and Sahukar, they are giving credit and they are charging exorbitant rate, and in repaying the exorbitant rate, the poor, the tribal, they just lose their land. So, unless there is a effective method of credit, it is very difficult. To sustain this inclusive growth. inclusive growth, if you do not have sufficient infrastructure, infrastructural facilities, they can only be provided if the poor, if the people at the village level, they have sufficient finance to invest. They can invest finance only when they have, but if they do not have finances, they do not have money to invest, then it is not possible that they can benefit from cultivation, or they can benefit from agricultural practices. So this is the evaluation of government policies and programs adopted for making it effective. In summarizing my lecture, I can say that the idea of inclusive democracy, idea of inclusive growth is important not only for sustaining democracy, but sustaining the faith of people in democracy. This is very important. If people lose their faith in democracy, then the alternative, the other alternative is very dangerous. Violence. The counter process to democracy is violence. Violence gets legitimacy, whether it is at national politics or international politics. If democratic aspirations of the people, I can present you the macro picture. Macro picture is inclusive democracy is addressing the aspirations of the people at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. If there is a one-to-one correspondence, then the possibility of violence is minimal. There is no taker to violence. But if democracy is denied, if democratic aspirations of the people, they are not fulfilled, they are denied, then in that case, if they are denied, then in that case, there is a possibility, not possibility, we find that violence in India, there is a Maoist violence. Maoist violence is taking place, and the Prime Minister of this country, he has said that Maoist violence is one of the major challenges, one of the major internal security threat. It is an acknowledgement by the Prime Minister of the country. They are well spread in 13 states, and only yesterday or day before yesterday, 6 IPS CRPF Jawans, they lost their lives in Maoist attack. So it is not the question of failure of democracy. It is a question of failure of people's faith in democracy. If democracy is not effective, then people will take weapons. Violence gets legitimacy. This presents a horrendous future. So what why there is a new legitimacy to violence? They are raising the issue of the people. What they are raising? They are raising the issue of land right. They are raising the issue of dignity. They are raising the issue of minimum wages. They are raising the issue of right of displaced people. They are raising the issue of right to forest. So these rights, if they are not addressed by the state, if there is no participation of the people, then in that case, what is the alternative left to the people? If people are deprived of democratic alternative, if democracy doesn't solve their problem, then it is far more easier to turn to violence. And this is the shortage of democratic alternatives, democratic options. In the shrinkage of democratic option, democratic alternatives, that has led people to violence. So, in conclusion, I can say that the idea of inclusive democracy is not only important, significant for the success of democracy. It is important to retain the faith of people in democracy, because success of democracy can be reassured, further attempts can be made, but once the people lose their faith on democracy, if they realize that democracy is not an effective method of solving people's problem, in such situation, this is a very dangerous situation, then in such situation violence will get undue significance, undue importance. So, to create the world violence free, to make the world a world where nobody is denied, where the rights of the people are not encroached upon either by the state or by the powerful people. And this is the whole idea behind this inclusive democracy, to ensure democracy, democratic rights. People can realize their rights through democracy, through the politics of democracy. If the politics of democracy has a chance, then the politics of violence, then the politics of terrorism, or any politics based on violence, it has no chance at all. So, last but not the least, we have to retain the faith of people in democracy to mitigate any unsavory behavior or any misadventure by other forces bent on destroying democracy. Thank you very much.
This is in principle, or you can say this is principle a good idea, but in practice is this possible to do so, or we need another kind of approaches to deal with?
No, as I said, that democracy is important not in an instrumental sense, that instrumentally we have to ensure democracy, and democracy does not mean only election. We should not reduce the meaning of democracy to holding election. Democracy is a much wider concept in the sense that people see their future, see their realization of better future through democracy, because the central idea of democracy is based on idea of equality. Nobody will be denied equal opportunity, nobody will be denied equality in the realization of basic human rights, right, like education, employment, health, shelter. These are some basic requirements, human requirements, and nobody will be deprived of these basic human requirements. They will be treated equally. In realization of equal opportunity, there will be no discrimination. Everybody will be provided with equal opportunity. And for this, many policies, programs initiated by the state, but a state simply for its own legitimacy, a state and government, if for legitimacy they implement policies or they form policies and programs, but in reality they do not ensure implementation, but in reality there is a lack of governance, in reality there is a lack of people's participation in the conceptions of program, policies. In reality the structural issues are not addressed. Then mere making policy not going to help, not going to ensure inclusive growth, either inclusive growth or inclusive democracy. So you have to take people along in conceiving policy, in formulating policy, and implementing policy. If there is a participation of people, participatory democracy, if the nature of democracy is not participatory, then it will be a formal democracy. Formal democracy is not going to solve the problem. You have to make democracy substantive. You have to make it much more deeper. How can you make it much more deeper? By ensuring the participation. This is a trickle-down theory, top-down approach. Top-down approach will not help. Top-down approach, it has failed to solve people's problem. Top-down approach has failed to solve human problem. You have to take policy initiative from the grassroots. What people want at the grassroots level. Then you have to reverse the order, down top approach. If it is down top approach, then possibly it will yield result, and then it would become much more easier to ensure equitable distribution, to ensure inclusive growth, to ensure inclusive democracy.
Okay. So, well, friends, as Dr. G.N. Trivedi said, that top-down, trickle-down theory has failed, and the people are searching the other ways. So, of course, one way is to bottom to top approaches, but there are also other views. So, we have to accommodate all view and see how inclusive democracy could be made successful and the government for the benefit of the people. So, with this word, we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on your behalf, I thank Dr. G.N. Trivedi for giving such an insightful lecture. Thank you very much.